Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today is episode 11, and I'm joined by professional bettor Nathan Snow. Nathan started out on the bookmaking side and progressed to the betting side, where today he is a renowned figure in Sydney betting circles. Nathan specialises in Sydney racing and discusses some of the tools he uses to win betting professionally. Nathan touches on Betfair, his time in the Sydney betting ring, and much more. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback and potential guests you would like to hear from. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy my chat with Nathan Snow. Today I'm joined by Nathan Snow. Nathan, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Nathan, why don't you start with a little bit of background about you and how you got involved and what led you down the road of getting involved in professional betting?
Yeah, well, I guess didn't really come from a racing background. I just had a dad and a granddad that loved betting and used to go to the tab every Saturday afternoon and lose their money every Saturday, but loved every minute of it. And yeah, I had a dad that used to take me along to Saturday morning sport, and then on the way home we'd stop off at the tab and I'd get to tag along with him, and he'd call it a lap of honour, going from Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and all the venues in between. And I just sort of sit and watch and have the occasional bet, and I just really enjoyed reading the form guides and seeing all the information, and it just looked like one giant puzzle to me. And it always sort of intrigued me, and you know, it's all through school. I was the kid at school that had the form guide out on a Friday and was taking bets on the footy and the races on Melbourne Cup Day and all that sort of thing. And you know, went off to uni, did a commerce degree, and got a job in finance. And when I was sort of halfway through uni, my sister actually knew Tom Waterhouse from out and about, and I said to her, next time you see him, ask if you can get me a job at the racetrack. I'd just love to be out there doing anything. And she actually got my first job out there, and I was a bagman for him when he, about 6 months after he started as a bookmaker. And yeah, I loved every minute of it. I knew I wanted to be out there, and you know, went to the job Monday to Friday and came out clerking on a Saturday and thought it was the greatest thing ever, and wasn't really, you know, enjoying uni, wasn't really enjoying the job when uni finished. And you know, I had my dad that instead of going to the tab on a Saturday when I was working, he'd come out to the races most Saturday. And you know, all the while I was, you know, growing up and in uni and whatnot, I was you know, reading and formulating my own thoughts. And you know, like most other people around my generation, I read the Don Scott books, and what really appealed was the idea of sort of cataloguing horses. And I used to keep just a basic spreadsheet of every horse that was sort of running in Sydney, and I'd put all sorts of comments in there. I'd watch every replay I could and just put in all sorts of comments and keep notes and look for patterns that I could see or things that mattered in horses' runs and videos and trainers' patterns or jockey patterns or whatever it was. And I just sort of start trying to price up races from there, I guess. And yeah, just I don't know, got to a point where I was sort of telling Dad what, you know, if I was a bookie, this is what I'd lay, and this is what price I'd lay it at, and all this sort of thing. And he could sort of see how miserable I was at my job and whatnot, and he was, you know, he wanted an excuse to be out there as much as anything. And he said, look, I'll lend you $30,000. We'll get you a bookmaker's license, and you know, that can be your bankroll, and you can have a crack at starting your own business. And yeah, I was 24 years old, and we went off to the licensing committee together. And yeah, I can still remember now is all the committee men looking down at us, and each of them taking their time to tell my dad that, you know, he's going to lose his money, he's going to lose your money. you may as well try and open a cafe for him or something else. And my dad was like, no, I believe in him and I think he can make a crack at it. And so then, I got my license, and first meeting was at Gosford, and it was pace setter stakes day then, and Takeover Target happened to be running, and the race is now called the Takeover Target Stakes because it won it by 5 lengths, and I think it was 5-4 into 6-4 on, and I think 8 races on the day and 6 favourites won, and and it was just an auspicious start to being a bookie. And with a bankroll of $30,000, and you're standing up there and you've got to stand everything to lose 1,000 on any one bet that comes up to you. I was, by the time any race jumped, I only wanted to stand things for 500, and if I wasn't making the right looking book, I'd do a lot of betting back, and the betting back wasn't great, and I was sort of having lots of poor bet backs to maintain the bankroll, but I was learning while I was doing it, and that was the important thing. And just sort of kept going along that path, and I guess the important part I learnt was I had to be my own judge, I guess. It was, if you stood up there as a bookie, the old times everyone told you as a bookie you could just stand up and bet the figures and everything will take care of itself. But by the time I got there, it was sort of a vastly different marketplace. There wasn't a lot of mug money around, and you had to, in my opinion, use your judgment to shape your book. And that's what there were other bookies that were sort of better at shaping their books on figures and numbers, and they did it their way, and I sort of thought I had to do it a different way. And the key part of that was when I got to Sydney and I got to the rails, and just by the fluke I ended up on the outside draw, and next to me was Stuart Davidson, and I got to peek over his shoulder and see the way he conducted his business, and he wasn't afraid to be completely contrarian to other bookmakers and how they did things, and just back his judgment on what he saw each race. And I just thought, well, I've just got to do that myself and live and die by my own. The fear driving me was going back to an office job, and I didn't want to do that. And I was just I didn't want to look back and think, oh, I wish I had done it this way, I wish I had done it that way. I just wanted to do it my way.
So how did you transition then from a young adult or through high school to becoming a bookie? Because I imagine there's a vast amount of knowledge you need to capture and grasp a lot of different concepts, and learning on the job with your own cash or your father's cash is probably not an ideal way if you want to, win every single time doing it that way. It's probably not for everyone, I should say. What type of things were you doing to transition?
The best place to learn was at the racetrack. Unfortunately, it's not something that's readily available now. Like when I showed up as a clerk, as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever it was as a bookie's clerk, there was so much knowledge in the ring, just standing around talking racing in between races, before the races, after the races. And as a young bloke, I just used to stand on the edges and listen and learn, and being a bookie's clerk was invaluable knowledge, standing at the back end watching the computer screen and how to shape a book, and which clients were smart, and how to judge which ones, working for the Waterhouses was a good learning in that, they knew which clients to play and which clients not to play, and how to treat them accordingly, and you learnt a lot by doing, and then the main thing was, like, you have to learn by doing sometimes. You can watch and watch and watch, and then when you're actually out there doing it yourself, it's a whole different ballgame, and there's no replicating that. There's no learning for that. Once you start, you sink or swim sort of thing, and that's the way it is in this game.
So take us back to when you were at the track, because you mentioned a few things there about who to play and what bets to take and things like that. How would it actually, how did you learn the language of that at the track? Because I'm assuming it's a lot different to what we hear these days, and some of the things that are happening, and some of the people, how they how they act. It sounds like you're a tradesman, you're learning every single aspect of it. Can you talk about a couple of the things or experiences that you had that were huge learning experiences and how you got to consume all that different knowledge?
Oh, look, I just remember, a circle, a group of people, like, Stuart Davidson, who I mentioned before, and Terry Griffin, and Glenn Pollitt, and Steve Caligieri, and these were like really Nick Katsaris, and these were really great racing minds, and they were all there talking and discussing their ideas, and they wouldn't have even noticed me lurking on the edges, just sitting there listening, and that was the best way to learn. You listen to the jargon and you'd pick it up that way, and yeah, that was the best way. And like I said, unfortunately, it's different now, but it's sort of been replaced a bit online. But yeah, it's there's still a lot of great avenues to learn.
So that whole theory out there about 10,000 hours you need to apply your trade, things like that, when just being there and consuming it and being around it and listening to different experts and how they go about it and picking apart exactly what works for you, is that sort of how you try to approach it? Because I imagine as a young man with a relatively small bankroll, I'm guessing compared to some others, it was scrappy and it was fighting, every race, every meeting just to get by.
Oh yeah, like every losing day, you'd think to yourself, is this the beginning of the end? And every losing week, it was like, am I supposed to be doing this? And it wasn't until after you've been doing it 3 years that you actually feel a bit more comfortable. And I guess that's where the 10,000 hours had come from. That 0 to 3 years of actually doing it, I guess.
Yeah. Did you do anything else during that time to augment your bookmaking, or?
No, it was just full time, and I was, just focused. I spent 14, 15 hours a day just doing the form and working on this spreadsheet that I was doing. It was a lot more laborious process back then, doing the form, than it is now. There's a lot of shortcuts you can use with computer programs and all that sort of thing. And back then, everything was very manual. You'd hand clock each horse with a stopwatch and all that sort of thing. And you couldn't just click on a website and watch a replay. I used to have barrier trials and country races sent to me on a VHS, and that's how it used to be done. And there was a bigger edge back then because of that effort you had to go to. But it's a lot more convenient now, and I guess it's a lot quicker time wise.
So looking back during your bookmaking days, besides the inherent edge in the market, what edge do you think you had, or what ways did you go about, I guess, maintaining your edge?
It was just my edge. I just always thought was just working harder than anyone else. I was never going to be smarter than them. I wasn't going to create a whiz-bang computer model. I just had to focus on my area of expertise and work as hard as I could at it and try and outwork everyone else. That was what it came down to. Just do the form, do it well, and stick to your opinion. And
now you're wagering full-time rather than bookmaking?
Yeah, well, about probably going back six years ago now, we were starting to get a lot less people on track. Everything was sort of transitioning online, and Betfair just started to come in, and you couldn't really access it on track when every other punter that was betting with you could. And then EI came along, and there was no racing here for 6 months, and I started betting on West Australian racing because it was a small pool of horses and I could sort of pick it up quickly, and sort of was enjoying the lifestyle of betting and picked it up pretty quickly, and things were going okay there. And then the racing came back in Sydney, and I just decided to go back on Saturdays only and bookmake and bet from Monday to Friday on all the New South Wales racing that I could. And after about a year of that, sort of became much more feasible and pretty clear to me that I was better off betting full time, and so I sort of gave away the bookmaking and moved on to betting and form analysis, and so using my skills in form to help out any other participants in the industry that's sort of looking for an edge, and moved on to selling the tips in the last couple of years as well to augment the income. And yeah, just everything's based around, my form analysis, I guess.
I must say, based on some of the previous guests I've spoken to and my understanding of the market, 24-year-old Nathan Snow his business model of laying maximum $500 on a horse seems to be well and truly implemented today based on the online strategy of some of these corporates. So I must say you're very prophetic in that sense.
Yeah, would have been easy to start off now.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your betting strategy now? Do you have a situational approach where you attack each race individually, or do you have sort of a defined strategy? Are you playing at the pointy end of the market, or focusing on, you know, shorter sprint races, or what are some of the things that you look for now?
No, I'm generally focused on runners that are sort of, you know, above $4, and generally have more success at runners away from the top end of the market. I find that it gets quite refined and quite pure, the bottom end of the market, and things can get missed, you know, at 15, 20 to 1 sometimes. That, you know, people can sometimes be doing the form quickly, going from race to race, and miss certain runners if they're just focused at the top end of the market. And you can get some big overlays if you're lucky. And I've just found over the years my success has been at that sort of price range. And I guess it probably comes from the bookmaking background where, you know, using your opinion and whatnot, you were still generally having the favourites as chop outs or sort of breaking square at best. And, you know, if you didn't like one, then you were trying to make it a big loser. And I guess in that respect, I was never really comfortable backing the favourites when I moved to the other side, because I was always looking for the longer price runners to keep when I was bookmaking to be good results. And that's how the transition came about, I guess.
So if you are working at $4 and higher, would you then have less bets throughout, you know, a 6-month or 12-month period? And therefore,
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and then therefore less turnover. And that does that cause larger swings, or does that impact your edge at all because your turnover is less?
It leads to less turnover. It leads to larger swings as well. And you've really got to be able to take the long-term view when you're operating that price range. There's a lot of self-belief involved that what you're doing and the processes you're doing are right, and that the variance will even out over the course of the long term. And, you know, the long term in racing, I do believe is 3 years. And, you know, I said that before. I didn't know whether I'd survive or not until I got to about year 3 of bookmaking. And I think it takes that long for the variance to even out, especially as I'm sort of only betting in one state and having, you know, probably a quarter or a fifth or even less number of bets than the guys that are able to bet everywhere. So, yeah, so you've just got to be a lot more patient, I guess, and sometimes you just got to believe.
So has that changed for you or developed over time with, you know, experience and that type of stuff? Because I would imagine you would like to try and smooth out the long run effects, essentially, to try and have a more stable rather than those swings. Have you sort of developed it at all as you've gone?
Look, I explored that sort of thing a few years ago, delving more into the shorter end of the market to sort of smooth out that variance, and it just didn't work out for me, and it wasn't something that, you know, I felt comfortable doing while I was doing it, and the results sort of weren't really there long term while I was doing it. So, yeah, I just went back to the other way, and just, you know, it's part of the way I do things, that the ups and downs are going to be steeper and longer than the others, I guess.
And what about money management? Because I would imagine if you're working from a $5 chance to a $25 chance, money management is critical in keeping your bank, I guess, alive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's the most important factor in being a successful gambler, in whether bookmaking, punting, poker player, whatever, is bank management. It's, you know, I've seen that many better judges than me, that many top judges that haven't made it because of poor bank management. And I've seen blokes that wouldn't know one end of a horse from another win squillions just because they're sensational gamblers. And it comes down to knowing the marketplace, knowing your bank management, and mentally not chasing, treating each race as an individual event. And it's very hard to do when you're in battle, but, you know, that's why only a few people actually, you know, a very small percentage of the market actually make a living from it. There's a lot of things you got to do right, and only one thing to do wrong, and you're no good.
So what is sort of the biggest downfall when it comes to money management? Is it that passion factor, and that people are sort of heated and, as they say in poker, a little bit on tilt and therefore make poor decisions?
Yeah, that's generally the number one. It's just general staking as well. Some people just generally bet too big for their bankroll, given the variance that is in racing. People don't understand that, even the top pros will have losing months, losing quarters, and it's about the long term,
And what about when you're trying to calculate your edge? So a lot of people say they'll bet based on their edge. Obviously it's a lot of subjective analysis, but is there certain things you can do to try and calculate why a $10 shot is better than the next $10 shot?
Well, that's the key to it, isn't it? Like you do try and separate which races are better betting propositions than others, and try to stake accordingly. And that's really important, and that comes from experience and feel. And if you keep records of your bets, you can go back and analyse that sort of thing, and that's really important when you're starting out. When you're in that first 3 to 5 years and you're finding your way and you're trying to get that right groove, it's all about being flexible and finding your right path, but then sticking solid to it once you're happy with it. I guess 80% of what I do now is essentially what I did back then, and the last 20% of the little tweaks that you add to you learn along the way, and you pick things up here and there, and you'll discard one or two things here and there. But the base of what you do won't essentially change too much.
Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on specialization? I know it's sometimes a sports betting sort of terminology when there's lots of different sports around the world, different regions, and even with college sports, there's different conferences here in the US. Do you believe in picking a region or a type of race, for example, or maybe a type of horse and a style of running? It might be horses that settle in the first 3 or 4 in your zone and you focus on that. Do you believe in that type of specialization, or how do you approach that?
Well, I'm just a big believer in the specialization of working in just New South Wales racing and focusing on that, because that was basically all I thought my capabilities were. Like I knew I wasn't capable of creating a top computer model or breaking racing down like that. And if I was a young kid right now and I was computer minded, that's the path I'd head down, because you can bet into a lot more events, and your edge might be smaller, but you can turn over a lot more money if you crack the code. And I guess it's the same in sports betting across the world. The big computer teams will bet the NBA or the NFL or whatever, but there'll be guys out there who can specialise and watch the games and know the players and whatnot, and get a feel for things and can beat the market that way. So, there's always going to be different ways to beat the market, and that's the beauty of racing and gambling, that there's so many different ways, and there's no right or wrong way, just as long as you're winning.
So do you delve into sports betting at all?
No, I do, but I shouldn't. I'm just a little hobby bettor. I'm no good at it.
Okay, are there any things that you've seen on the sports betting side that you're envious of, or you could see maybe translating over to racing?
It's just the availability and the information of the constant news about players, and everything's just so in the news that you just envy that. If racing could have that more than 1 week a year, it'd be wonderful for the sport.
Yeah, it's Michelle Payne or nothing in the off season, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So you mentioned you specialise in Sydney. What happens when you have a whole bunch of Melbourne horses coming up, or Queensland horses, flying in for that weekend? How do you go about approaching that?
Yeah, well, if there's a lot of them, I generally don't bet a lot in that race. And, if there's one or two, I'll try and ask someone smart that I respect, or, I've got a decent sort of ratings program here that can help me line them up to some extent. But, yeah, it's all a bit of guesswork for me at that point. But I just generally take the base view that our horses are generally better up to 1,600 or so, and I'll respect the interstate horses when at 2,000 metre plus, but I'm generally trying not to bet too much in the staying races anyway. So. Okay.
So how about, I'm interested in how you approach the massive stables. Like now we've obviously got Waller and Weir. In the past it was Darley with Snowden, and then you had Patnack Farm, and you had now obviously Godolphin. they're in every race. You see them all the time. Oftentimes they're very short in the market. Do you have a way that you handle them as a whole, or do you just look at each individual race and value that horse based on its ability and its form and its sort of recent history and those type of things?
Yeah, I am generally looking at the individual, although, some stables do have patterns that you apply to the horses. Some take a while to get fit in the preparation, while others are wound up and ready to go first up and that sort of thing. But it's generally more of a case of the individual in that race.
Okay, and can you tell me some of the things you try and do to battle the cognitive bias that comes with something like horse racing? Obviously, if you watch a race and you see something flying home down the outside, there's probably a few reasons why it did that, and based on what some of the other guests have said, it's probably not as good as it looks. And I guess maybe talk about with trials, how trials seem to be, I mean, they're not real races, obviously, but they're still somewhat competitive in certain respects. How do you balance that, what you see in the trial? Do you use the times? Do you use other things to try and factor those in or take them out? How do you balance what you're seeing with other aspects of your form?
Yeah, I find times are less important in trials when you're looking at them, but they're still a factor, obviously. But you're looking at a few different things. You're looking at sort of the grip the jockey has on the horse. You're looking at how the horse moves in its action. You're looking at which stable it's from. Do they likely have them ready to go in the trials? Is there much improvement, or do they sort of play a few ducks and drakes in the trials? And you just sort of that's one of the things that'll always be one of the specialises edges, I guess, over the bigger programs. That those trials they're very hard to quantify without watching an experience, I guess.
I want to talk a little bit about Betfair. When it started, what was its impact in the early stages? I mean, were you bookmaking then, or were you punting then? Where were you when it came into Sydney racing?
I was still bookmaking at that point, and actually near the end of my time, so for about a year or so, you were basically betting blind as a bookmaker. You weren't allowed any computers at your stand, and every punter that had a runner on their phone was looking at Betfair at home, and it was like a shooting gallery. And because Betfair was just a place where every smart punter congregated. There was no, I guess their marketing was such that there was, it was hard for them to get a lot of recreational clients. The product was so different that there was no real mug money that came along with it. And the market just became very pure on Betfair. And they could just see what price things were going to firm at and which the horses were going to drift. And you were at a disadvantage when you couldn't watch Betfair and they could watch Betfair. And then it came into a point where the stewards allowed bookmakers to have a look at Betfair, and then you could bet back on Betfair if you'd laid a runner on track. And at that time I was doing a bit of, a lot of my books were a lot of bets in the race, a lot of lays in the race, and I was betting with other bookies, and so I was betting with Betfair as well. And I wasn't allowed to bet there unless I'd laid the horse on track, and they fined me $500 because I did the wrong thing, and that was fair enough. And yeah, that was part of the process of me deciding that I was better off sitting at home betting at that point. And then about a year or so later, they let Betfair in properly. So,
how do they monitor that? How do they know if you've laid the toppy and then you're going to bet back on Betfair? How do they actually follow that? Because I imagine you were writing tickets on paper; they weren't automated through a machine or anything like that.
No, you would, like the laptop. You had to use, if my memory serves me correctly, the laptop you had to buy a new laptop, and it had to go to Racing New South Wales to have like monitoring device put on it or whatever before you could use it on your stand.
Really?
And they could see anything you were doing on that computer, and then obviously they had the Betfair records and they had your book records, so everything's time stamped.
Yep.
So yeah, it was no big deal. I did the wrong thing and I was fined, and rightly so. But yeah, it just sort of proved to me that what wasn't the place for me to be on track at that point.
So you're not allowed to just what if you liked a horse in the race and you wanted to have a bet on Betfair? You couldn't do that as a bookmaker. You'd have to do it in
No,
your personal name.
I had to do it. I had to do it with a bookie on track at that point. Now as a bookie on track, you can do what you want on it.
And how has it developed from those, I guess, the initial stages to now? Has there been a huge change, or is it still a congregation of the smart players and mixed in with a few others?
Yeah, it still pretty much is that. The occasional wow comes along, but yeah, it's the market setter. It's changed the face of the marketplace here since it's come in. Like, every bookie watches it, every corporate watches it, every punter now watches it, looking for the right time to bet. Every person that doesn't need to do form now can watch Betfair and make a living if they know how to read a market correctly. It's completely changed the dynamic of everything. It stimulates a lot of wagering as it is now.
Is it open to any type of sort of market manipulation and I guess foreshadowing on Betfair and things like that?
Absolutely. There's lots of games played because, when people realised that everyone was watching and looking for a lead on it, the smarter, bigger players started throwing a few dummies here and there to catch people out, and that still goes on. And, if you just follow it doing ABC, you'll get beat. There's always a little trick to it.
And is there enough volume to, I guess, absorb that, or is it still at a point where it can easily be done if you've got a big enough bankroll and you've got enough outs somewhere else that you can, I guess, put that dummy on Betfair and then make a few wagers elsewhere to make it worthwhile?
Yeah, it doesn't take much to move Betfair. You can, especially early, and you can make it. You can put it on a string.
So, Betfair's the only exchange that I know of. Is there any other exchanges operating on Sydney racing?
I don't think so.
So would it be better if there were others, or not so much of not a monopoly, but a single player?
The market's not big enough, as Betfair's proven. Unfortunately, I wish Betfair would get more traction, but it doesn't seem to be big enough liquidity here. When you look overseas and you look at a race in England or you look at a soccer match, and unfortunately, it's just terrible.
So what, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest value, how valuable has Betfair been to you as a bookmaker or a punter in the past? Is it something that's higher on the scale, or is it something that, if no one had it, it wouldn't be the end of the world because then you would just be playing against each other again?
Well, that's the thing. Like, if, despite me saying that the Betfair taxes, or the recent tax is no good and, we need Betfair to stay, for me, personally, as a form student, it'd probably be better if Betfair was gone. Without a lot of people knowing when to bet or what price to take, it'd be much easier to get a bet on at different prices, and the market would be much more fluid, I think, instead of just sticking to whatever Betfair is. And but that'd be good for me for 3 or 4 or 5 years. But for the long-term health of the market, if I want to be betting in 15, 20, 25 years, I think Betfair needs to be here. So
you think you would lose a lot of those computer-driven programs that are betting at a certain price, and the arbitrage people and those people would just be gone, and therefore the whole overall market would suffer?
Yeah, I think it stimulates a lot of growth. I think there's a lot of people betting that wouldn't be betting if, like, the argument from racing bodies is if they're not betting on Betfair, they'll bet somewhere else. I don't think that flies with a lot of Betfair customers. I think a lot of them will just move on to sport or just stop betting altogether or go to shares or whatever it is. It's not the same without it to them, and I understand that point of view. But unfortunately, the market has changed from when racing got all of its funding from a Tote business. It's completely changed, and it's changing even more quickly. And it's what do you want to do? What do you want the market to look like in 15, 20 years? What do you see it looking like, and how are you going to capitalise on it?
So is that the only message from Racing New South Wales as to why Betfair shouldn't exist? Is it just because they think do they legitimately think that people will bet on the Tote or with a fixed odds operator if Betfair's not there? Or is there another reason?
Racing New South Wales argument is, in their mind, and it's a logical argument, we've got a product, we charge X amount for the product, and if you want to, use that product, you're going to pay X amount. But the precedent's already been set when, they charge for tote business 7 cents and they charge for fixed odds business 2 cents. So they recognise there's two different types of wagering services inside the one business there, and they charge them differently. So to me, it seems logical you should recognise Betfair as an exchange and not a bookmaker and merely a matcher of bets, and therefore should be charged at a different rate to a normal bookie. But they just see Betfair as a bookie, and therefore they should pay what every other bookie is. And the model, unfortunately, just doesn't jerry for that.
So do you think, or is it clear in your mind that it's better for the tote that Betfair is around?
Look, for the tote itself, I'm not sure. The tote needs a lot of resurrecting as it currently stands. Unfortunately, it's been left to die away the last sort of 5 years with this complete focus on fixed odds everywhere, and something needs to be done, or racing's going to have to look at other means of funding to compensate for the loss that fixed odds turnover while going through the roof still provides less funding. And the logical argument is, in 10 years' time, when the tote is completely gone, it's all going to be fixed odds funding. So they're just going to have to keep whacking up the percentage, and that just won't work long term.
You said it's 2 cents now?
Yeah, it's 2 cents now, or 3 cents on major days, or something like that.
And so what are the bookmakers' sort of average margins on those sort of major days? Is there scope to get it up to 3 and 4 and 5 cents, or is that just going to blow everyone away? Like you can imagine they have already had troubles in the past.
Look, I had a little bit of experience consulting at a startup bookie last year, and I've seen how tough it is at the back end of corporate bookies. Like, other than the top one or two, the rest of them aren't making a lot of money, and it's tough going out there. And any more raises above sort of the current levels, it's going to get very hard for them to compete without passing on the cost of the consumer. And the thing is, you could. I think they're in their mind they're thinking, well, we'll get everyone betting on the tote, and the way we'll do that is we'll keep upping the charges on fixed odds so that their percentage is in line with the tote percentage, rather than let's bring down the tote percentage and regenerate it that way. And it's sort of reverse thinking, because people will just stop betting on racing. That a generation ago, when I was growing up, sports betting really wasn't much of a thing. And if I'm a young kid growing up now and I'm looking at 119% markets on racing, and I'm looking at 104, 105 on sport, I know what I'm going to be more attracted to.
Yeah, no, the availability as well. There's just so many different products out there, so many offerings. So
that's what racing doesn't understand. Racing doesn't understand. It's competing against sports betting. It's competing against poker. It's not competing against racing in New South Wales and racing in Victoria. It's got its parameters all wrong, unfortunately.
So do you have any tips for the Saturday carnival punters who are going to the track or are going to watch some of the big races in the spring or the autumn? Any sort of small things they could be doing, or maybe even just in general, some small advantages that you see in racing in 2017 that the person who doesn't have 14, 15 hours a day to do some form can institute and hopefully maybe get a win on that day?
Oh, Jesus, that's a tough one. I guess the simplest one is you look for the top stables and the jockeys. They generally, the top stables are training the most winners, and they're engaging the best riders. And when you put those two together, they're generally thereabouts. But yeah, if you're once a sort of week or once a year punter, that's sort of the best tip I can give you. But
okay.
That's the thing. It's it's all about getting those once a year punters to delve a bit deeper into the game. And
yeah,
there's so many layers to it. There's just it's a puzzle with 1,000 pieces, and yeah, it's the more you peel away, the more you want to get into it.
So how do you complement and augment your form sort of outside of racing? Do you do you mentioned some of the Don Scott books and a little bit of reading. Is there any other sort of things you can sort of point some people who are sort of semi-professional or getting more involved too that would be valuable for them to sort of augment what they're doing?
Oh, look, I've read a lot of what Dan O'Sullivan does and puts out, and he's one of the best minds in Australian racing at the moment. And the way he thinks about it and approaches things, it's a bit different to how I do it. But I really enjoy reading his stuff and seeing how he thinks about it always makes me think, and I think it's a great place to start for a lot of people. And, you know, there's a website that I do a bit with called Champion Bets, and they put out a lot of good articles for punters and things to think about. So, yeah, there's a lot. The other thing is Twitter, what it's become these days is there's a heap of information out there and a heap of smart people if you know the right ones to follow.
And what about you today or this week or this month or this year? What are you up to? Are you doing your own stuff and working with Champion Bets?
Yeah, just doing that and just betting away. And yeah, I've got a few subscribers that get my prices and bets and a few little things and chat on a live page for them. And yeah, just living the dream still.
So how can some of the listeners reach out to you if they want to follow you on Twitter or get involved in the live page stuff? What's the best way for that to happen? Yeah,
just go to www.championbets.com.au and find me on Twitter at Snowbet.
Brilliant. Nathan, thank you very, very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. All the very best, and I look forward to chatting again.
No worries. Talk to you soon.